Hello and welcome to part 4 of our video series on building a Node, Express and Postgres based API server. What we're going to be doing today is getting our HTTP server set up, so that's going to be making use of the Express framework that we installed in an earlier video. If you haven't done that so far, install the latest version or version 4.17.1, which was the latest at the time of recording this. And you can follow along with me. There's a link in the video description to the GitHub repo that I'm using that houses all of the code, and for reference we're working from the part for start branch, so if you want to follow along, check out that repo and check out the branch as well, and you'll be in the same position as I am. So what we're going to do today is we're going to add a HTTP server, and then we're going to wire that up to our startup service as well, so that when our application starts it kicks off the HTTP server as well. So first things first, we're going to add a new folder called HTTP server, and then within there we're just going to add an index.js file which is going to house the code for our HTTP server. What we're going to do is we're going to create what's known as a singleton, so that our HTTP server only ever exists once within our application, but can be used by multiple parts of our application should we need it to be. So first things first, we're going to import or require a couple of libraries to begin with. First one's going to be Express, and we're going to require Express. Next one is going to be Cause, which is the cross-origin resource sharing library. This essentially allows your API to be accessible from clients that aren't on the same domain as it, and then we'll also want our config, because that's going to have our Express port that we're going to be wanting to use for the server as well. So just import that from config. Now, to create a singleton that can be reused across the application, I'm just going to create a class called app HTTP server factory. And a factory is typically something that you use to create an instance of something. So when we go to do our export, what we'll actually have is we'll export app HTTP server, and this is actually going to be an instance of app HTTP server factory. So that means that whenever this app HTTP server is imported into another part of our code, it will only ever exist once, so we don't have multiple instances trying to kind of work against each other. What we're going to do is we're going to declare a port on our class, and that port is going to be config.expressport, since that's going to be the port that we're going to want to use, and it can pick that up from the environment variables. And what we'll also do is we will create a function called start, and this is going to be the function that gets called when we want to initialize our HTTP server. And what this is going to do, this is actually going to return a new promise, and a promise is essentially JavaScript's way of saying that at some point in the future something is going to happen. I'm going to return or I'm going to reject, which is actually done by like resolve or reject. Resolve is when everything's gone fine. Reject is when an error's happened. And what you can, the way that we're going to work with it today is we're just going to have a single resolve function, and at the end of the once we've done all the bits that we need to set up, we'll just end up calling resolve at the end, which will resolve the promise for us, so any other code that's waiting for that to happen can then continue on with what it needs to do. So first thing that we're going to do within our promise is we're going to declare ourselves a new variable called app, which is going to contain an instance of Express that we're going to use for our API server. So what we'll do is we'll just call Express like so. And the way that Express works is it builds up a configuration over time using a set of functions for middleware to essentially give it instructions on how it needs to work. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make use of a couple of ways a couple of configurations for Express that tell it, one, to set up cores, and two, that whenever it receives any JSON-like data, that it can pass that data and make it available for our routes that are going to be handled by the API server. So the way that we're going to do that is you can use app.use, and the first one that we're going to set up is cores, so we just call cores like so. And the second one that we're going to use is express.json. And what that does is it just says, whenever we receive any JSON data, I want you to process it and present it in a way that we can work with within our code. Once that's done and everything's set up, then what we can do is we can invoke app.listen. And what this does is this will actually start an API server, and it will listen on the port that we have asked for by declaring by passing it in a port. We'll just do this.port. And once the API server is started, it's going to invoke the second argument, which is a function that will pass to it, commonly referred to as a callback function, so that when the server has started, then what we want it to do is call this function and take that action. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a console.log, and we'll just say HTTP server started on port, and then we'll pass in the port, which will be this.port. And once that's done, what we're actually going to want is this resolve function to be called from within here. So that what it says is, from top to bottom, create an instance of Express, tell it to use the cores middleware, tell it to pass any incoming JSON data, and we want it to listen on port 3000, which is a config port that we'll provide. And once that's done, I want you to tell me that the HTTP server has started. Then I want you to resolve this promise that we've got here, and that will allow any code that's waiting for this to happen to then continue. And where this will come into, when we'll actually make use of this, is when we start to work with it within our startup part of the application. Because at the moment, what we've got is when our services start, it says we'll prepare environment variables, it'll do that. We'll add another console.log here, starting services for application. And then what we want to do is we want to await app HTTP server dot start. And all we need to do now is just require the app HTTP server from equals require HTTP server. And now what's going to happen is when this app starter gets called, we'll just change this to an async function actually while I can see that. When this app starter gets called, it'll go and validate all the environment configuration for us, and then the app HTTP server will attempt to start, and if that all works okay, what we'll see is 4 log messages: preparing environment variables, starting services for application, HTTP server started on port 3000, and then all services started for application, so that we can see that all the steps have gone through in the order that we're expecting, so there's no side effects. So let's give this a go. Starting our application, source app index.js, and we can see that everything has started up as we're expecting it to. So that's going to be what all we'll cover off in this video. What we'll do in the next video is actually go through and start to write some unit tests for the HTTP server, and we'll also extend the tests that we've got in here in the startup service so that we can check to make sure this app HTTP server.start has been called as well. But I hope this video has been helpful, and look out for the next one.